Hi, I'm Dr. Billy Retzoff, and welcome back to ABA-ish. Today's video is going to be a follow-up from one that I posted before that talked about the importance of teaching replacement skills and regulation skills to students. So if you haven't watched that one yet, I'll link it in the show notes and go check it out. So what we're going to be talking about specifically is the need to teach really concrete skills, even if the problem or the behavior is really complex. And the example that I'm going to give is a perception check. So we know that a replacement skill is an appropriate behavior that produces the same outcome as an inappropriate behavior. So that's where it gets its name, right? It's to replace the inappropriate behavior with something more appropriate. The goal is that because the student, the kid, whoever it is, has a way of getting that same outcome with an appropriate behavior, then we'll see less of that inappropriate behavior because they don't need that outcome because they already have it. As kids get older, the inappropriate behavior that they have can sometimes function to escape or avoid conflict. So, this can happen with young kids too, but it's something that I've really seen in my career as kids progress. It's much more likely that they're having inappropriate ways to get out of conflict or what they perceive as a really negative interaction. So, a kid experiences a negative interaction with a teacher, they engage in a lot of inappropriate behavior, and the teacher then sends them to the office so they are no longer having to interact with that teacher. So, for these types of students, it's really important that we teach them conflict resolution. We teach them other ways to manage the complex, challenging social situations that all of us get into other than inappropriate behavior. We have to replace those behaviors with something more appropriate. The problem is that conflict resolution is really a broad and ill defined term, right? If you just tell someone we'll have better conflict resolution, that's very challenging. What are they supposed to do? What does that look like? So, when we're teaching these really complex replacement skills, the best thing to do is to start with teaching really discrete skills that can be broken down into steps. Now, something that's important with this is that not one single skill can replace all the situations that they're going to get into, right? So it's not that there is one simple thing we can teach that fixes all the problems, but instead we have to focus on teaching them multiple skills that they can use depending on the situation. But again, rather than it being a broad, ill defined skill that we're teaching, we want to have a really clear, discrete skill that we can teach the kids. So, I talked about in that other video perception checks, and a lot of people were interested in that concept and wanted to know more about it. So, first and foremost, I am not the person who created this. This is something that you can find in lots of different places. Cognitive behavioral therapists will talk about perception checks. I even found an awesome YouTube video that I used to show students explaining what perception checks are, and I can link that one in my show notes too, so that if anybody else wants to see it, they can. So, just to be clear, this is not my idea, but it's something I found really useful with kids. Okay, so when I'm talking to kids about a perception check, the first thing I need to do is make sure that they understand when they would use the skill. So I could tell them something like, we're going to use this skill anytime that we're frustrated, annoyed, or upset by somebody's actions. And we want to explain the rationale. Why we're using this skill is because when we assume that we know someone's intention, we assume we understand their motivation and why they did something, we might end up having unnecessary conflict because we might be wrong about our assumptions. And the other thing I like to highlight to students is that this also gives you a framework for raising your concerns in appropriate ways. A lot of times our kids, they want to tell us what's bothering or them or upsetting them, how they perceived a situation, but they don't have those great frameworks for doing that. So this is a framework for which they can share their concern with another person, whether that person be a friend, a parent, a teacher, whoever it is. Now, when we're teaching this, the student should be calm and regulated and in a place where they're able to engage in these types of conversations. If they're not at that point, go ahead and wait for doing it another day. So, initial teaching, calm, cool, collective. This is a skill that we're practicing, not necessarily because we need it right this second, but because we might need it in the future. Once they've mastered this skill in that context, that's when then we start to use it when they're getting upset. So then what I could do is when I see the student is maybe starting to escalate a little bit, I could ask them what's going on, hear that they need a perception check, and prompt them through that process. So teach the skill first when they're calm, and then gradually you start trying to have them use the skill in the situations that they're more likely to need it, where it's a little bit harder and a little bit harder because they're a little bit more frustrated. All right, so a perception check has 3 easy steps, and that's one of the things I love about this as a skill for kids is it's easy to remember 1, 2, 3, right? So the first thing you need to do is describe the behavior that is upsetting you, concerning you, or frustrating you. Then you give two possible interpretations of that behavior. So I always tell students, give the interpretation that you have in your head, and then try to think of one that paints it in a more positive light or is more sympathetic to that person. So sometimes how I help students think of that is to think about the reasons why you might do those things. The third thing is to request clarification from the person about the behavior and your interpretations. All right, so let me give you guys an example of this. So, say I had a friend who walked out of the room and they didn't say goodbye to me, and that really upset me. I was frustrated about that and I didn't feel good about that. I could go to that friend and say, "Hey, when you walked out of the room without saying goodbye, I didn't know if you were mad at me or maybe if you were just in a hurry and forgot. What's going on?" That opens that door and that opportunity for the friend to share with me why they walked away without saying goodbye. So usually when I'm working with students, we do go through a few examples where I just show them how they could do it. Again, we usually watch that YouTube video so that they can see some examples from them too. It's like over dramatic and kind of entertaining. And then for them to start practicing, I give them scenarios. So, for example, I might say, you have a good friend who you've been friends with for years and you guys often share secrets, but you've noticed recently that they've changed. Your conversations aren't the same and they don't seem to be paying attention to you. You've even had to repeat yourself at times just to get their attention. So, I then ask the students to do the perception check. So, on a piece of paper with a partner, however you want to do that, first describe the behavior, give your two interpretations, and then request clarification. So, an example of what that might look like is the student might describe their behavior by saying, when we are talking, you seem not to be paying as much attention as you used to be. Their interpretations could be, I'm not sure if you are bored with our conversations or is there something distracting you in your life? Requesting clarification, they could ask their friends, so what's going on? So we go through tons of examples of these. If I have a student I know well, I try to give lots of examples of things that are similar to them. Then sometimes I help them, like we talked about, you want to introduce it more and more in those real life situations. So sometimes it might be after a situation, we practice how could we have used a perception check. And then as you start to get those learning moments, in the moment, you can prompt them, hey, let's do a perception check right now. You're really frustrated with Mr. B. Let's go ahead and talk about what is going on. You can practice your perception check with me, and then you can go do it with him. I hope this was helpful in making it clear kind of how sometimes we have to create really concrete skills, even for those very complex reasons that people are trying, those complex behavior replacement skills like conflict resolution, perspective taking, those broader things. So if you like this and you want more content to keep coming, please subscribe and share. That supports me so much. You have no idea. And if you have any questions, leave me a comment. Use the form to submit your question, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day.